We come from established lives. We had a life. You can't explain millions of people with one step, refugee, full stop.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Waad Al-Kateab. I'm a Syrian filmmaker, and I'm very happy to welcome you all at this lovely Friday night. I have with me Mohamad Hafez and Jimmy Goldblum, the director and the main feature in A Broken House, short documentary like we have seen all now. And it's just my pleasure to have this conversation between like all of us and just like talk about a lot of things happened in the film and behind the scenes as well. Jamie, Muhammad, if you would love to introduce yourselves, even if it's a couple of words.
Yeah, thank you, Waad. We were saying it before we came live, but I'm very grateful for you moderating this talk because Sama is one of the most shattering films I've ever seen in my life, and I think it was a little bit of a mantle that we were holding ourselves up to as we were trying to edit this film. So we're very, very grateful for you lending your time. So thank you.
Thank you, Muhammad.
He said
I think
it
now
best.
everyone knows you, but we can like just tell us more.
I am the lucky person that life had sent me beautiful friends like Jimmy and his team to fully tell this important story to a wider audience because I've been struggling to tell it in the right respectful manner, and so I'm very honored to be part of this film. I'm the subject of this film, and I'm very honored to be here with you today, Wad. And we have a lot to speak about and share.
Yeah, so I will start like straight away with the main question. I was like curious to know more about how did you both meet? Like where the idea come from? How like like how this film became like a film?
Yeah, it's a circuitous story because I was actually setting up a series for Apple Plus called Home, which was about architects and the ways that they thematically explore notions of home in their work. And so Mohammed's story actually was presented as part of the research process for that series. And my wife is from Pakistan. This was 2017. You can imagine the context in Syria, what it would mean to have someone like Mohammed representing Muslim immigrants and refugees. I mean, it was perfect, and I was so excited. But an executive at Apple actually rejected his story because they didn't think that Mohammed lived in a fancy enough house, you know. So I was pretty furious. Like at that time, my wife and I had a courthouse wedding because the Muslim ban was working its way through the courts of the United States, and so everyone in our community was so angry and so sad, and I really wanted to find a way to tell this story independently. So by just pure luck, I met the former Congressman Dick Gephardt, who used to be the House Majority Leader of Congress in the 90s. And he was just apoplectic about the state of immigration, the way that our marginalized communities were being spoken about. And he gave us the ability to tell the story. And I called Mohammed and I said, if I can do it independently, would you still work with me? And thankfully, he agreed.
But what did you feel when uh like Jamie told you? Like first we're not or you don't know like that Jamie was going to do this at the beginning. Like as part of the research, did Muhammad knew about the
I knew
story?
I was
Yeah,
we were back and forth talking about the Apple series,
yeah.
and then when it all worked out and I met Jimmy, I was very glad things have worked out this way. Oftentimes, when you're dealing with series or you're dealing with something, they try to put you in a certain bucket or just to check off certain check marks they have to meet the scenarios. And I've also struggled. I've always struggled with this with press writing about my paper, my work. Most of the time, they're looking for a soundbite to frame me as a depressed Syrian artist, very sad, and he's so depressed he makes models of destruction. End of story. And they get their likes, they get their followers, they get their clicks. Goes on a major, and I've never felt like, yeah, that's part of the story, but that's not, that's not the title. We're not people of despair. So uh, Jimmy and I kind of hit it off on a very good terms from the beginning. There was no hidden agenda. There was no financial trick for Jimmy to kind of gain behind this. I met him and I met his kind wife, and it was genuine. So I really got excited from the get go about, okay, let's do this. And uh, I think we were all very lucky that I was in a mood that kind of put everybody in the background. I was very relaxed.
Jimmy, like as a indie film, like it's always been a struggle, like to make any film, it's always like a great sacrifice and like challenges and all of this. What was the main challenge you've had while you were working on this story?
I mean, in some respects, this was one of, I mean, honest, no, it is probably like the most beautiful process in terms of making something that I've ever experienced in my life. And I think a lot of that is just Mohamad. I think, one, just as an artist, visually, he's incredible. I mean, he's actually like, just like, it's a cinematic treat being in his studio. But two, like, he was so vulnerable and so in a space of openness with me. And it was a real gift. And so sometimes I struggle, I think actually what was hard is getting the film out into the world. That was the hardest part because we wrapped up right before COVID. We finished in January 2020. And we went through a period where it wasn't getting into any festivals for like 8 months, and it wasn't hitting in the way we loved it. We loved this film, but it wasn't hitting in a way we didn't understand. And I just think that something happened in quarantine where all of a sudden people, everyone in the world was missing weddings and funerals and birthdays like Mohammed. And I think that in some ways, like halfway through COVID quarantine, people could connect to the story of refugee homesickness and immigrant homesickness in a way they couldn't prior. But for those 8 months, it was very painful. It was very painful.
Uh, Muhammad, how did you feel when like you feel like I did everything I want? I like sent a message and I talked about like so like touching and difficult moments in your life, and then like yeah, the first 8 months, how was it that for you when you felt like there was not really like people didn't really react to this?
Well, the nice thing about Jimmy and his team, they keep me in the dark with such bad news. So um, you have to understand, Waad, I live under a rock for the last few years. My studio is my refuge, my cocoon. What Jimmy was saying about it was really true. They caught me in a psychological moment where I couldn't care less about anything. This
Yeah.
was a personal, therapeutic, cathartic way of making with expressing myself. I had just gotten divorced. I was living very high contrast in my life. On daytime I was a corporate, clean look architect pitching uh, $200 million projects everywhere, and at night or after hours, I'm struggling with the war. I'm struggling with my personal life, with my family falling apart, with my country falling apart. But you could appreciate that I couldn't care less about likes, followers. No offense to Jimmy, but this wasn't my goal personally. Alhamdulillah, when I watched the film eventually, and they showed it to me, and I was very happy because I was very moved. It finally drew a full picture of what it meant. It's a short documentary. You can't tell an entire life worth in a short documentary, but nonetheless, they did such a good job that uh, it showed not only the destruction but the aftermath of wars. What happens to these families in the diaspora? What happens to a single family having all four siblings living in different countries, not being able to be together, and so on. These are issues that the media does not talk about, and people don't realize what it means to be stuck in a country 9 years with a Syrian passport, not being able to go anywhere. You probably know and relate very well what it means to travel on a Syrian passport, or to attempt to travel on a Syrian passport, and what are the aftermath of that. So I think in finally the feeling I've had is like, ah, this is telling a real story, not trying to get a headline like, here, look at this sad man, what he's done. Flip to the next story, but it was really humane.
I mean, I think what struck me more was like the homesickness, which we all are going through as Syrians all over the place, and so many moments like with your dad, your mom, how like we are trying in every way to just like like find a way of accepting that we no longer able to be there.
Mm.
Um, have your parents have seen the film?
They have. All my family has seen the film.
Do you remember any comments or anything like they have said about that?
What we've yet to speak about it. The family
Yeah.
watched the film, and I think it most likely affected everybody very deeply and hit the core. And that's it. No
Yeah.
comments, nothing. And it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, I think this is part of, yeah, like it's going on of the same story like you were trying to make it out for so many people. Jamie, as a director and also like producer of this, like is there any main, I don't know, like main idea or main scene or main story like you filmed with Muhammad and it didn't make it to the final cut and you still like intrigued of that piece that like yeah, I wanted this to be as well. But like as a story, I know like there's so many elements where we just, like let it go.
The original title of the film, which was actually probably part of the reason why we didn't get into certain festivals, was a Welsh word, Haraeth, which was based upon one of the works that Muhammad had in his studio. And Haraeth means it's a homesickness for a home to which you cannot return, or maybe that never was. And so to me, what that really is about is the way in which like Muhammad in the diaspora is, the idea of Syria is almost locked in time. He has the memories of Damascus, of this certain era, this syncretic place with, Hellenic history and Roman history, and of course, Islamic history, and everything comes together on these walls, this architecture. And then, so it's locked in place, but the reality of Syria and the reality of Muhammad's life are ever evolving, right? And so to me, like something that I think it comes across a bit in the film, but it's obviously something that is far deeper and can be explored in a million ways, is that way in which, like, in your homesickness, you start to change, like, your memories no longer align with the reality of the place and the sort of beauty of that and also the pain of that. So that's something that I hope I alluded to and you got the slightest taste of it, but there was certainly things that we could have gone to go much deeper with it.
Yeah, and yeah, it's, I mean, beautiful and sad at the same time. And Muhammad, from your side, I can see you smiling a lot. Any certain like story you talked about and you felt like, oh, I wish this been like made it to the final cut.
Um, Yani, there's no way you can tell a couple decades of struggle, you know, in 20 minutes, in 60 minutes, and more.
Not even in a year. Like, yeah,
Not
I
even
totally agree.
a
Yeah.
year. I was smiling because I saw you smiling, and I saw that you could relate. And most Syrians most immigrants in diaspora can
Yeah,
relate to this film very well. It's a human experience. Um, Sadly, we're living in time, very xenophobic time, and very, scaremongering and painting millions of people with one wide brushstroke, as though, uh, if you define Syrian as just a refugee and full stop. Uh, and all of us have lives behind us and things, and that romantic vision of home, the frozen in time. I smiled because I longed to this Damascus that has been frozen in time. Part of me even doesn't want to go back, to not override the beautiful memories I have. I'm very sensitive visual person. I cannot walk and see my beautiful Syria in rubble, you know. Um, and it's these human moments. If I can succeed to build a human bridge, a common denominator between me and a wider audience, to build empathy with my fellow Syrians and a wider Western audience, then it's a really an honor. If just I can just get a story in there, and I think the film got so many stories that connected these bridges. So I really don't have anything else to say. I wish that was there, because everything that was there has succeeded in building these bridges with folks. And I know that firsthand experience, because people have come to me and said, yeah, I'm Romanian. I came here to I'm Iranian, I'm Turkish, and I relate to that feeling. It's not only Syrians. There are Jewish Americans that donated to me their parents' suitcases to make art inside them, because they related to that feeling of nostalgia and homesickness.
Mm. I totally agree. Yeah, I think in so many places, and again, like it's similar to what Jimmy was saying about like the COVID time. Like I think taught so many people, even like when people in the same country they can't be like with their parents anymore for a while, or like so many issues was really like um difficult for so many people, and I think so many people can simply relate to that within the film. Um, I have one question from the audience where like someone is asking, due to the lockdown, have you had the chance to screen the film with an audience in person? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it took a long time. I mean, our first in-person screening it was definitely over a year into our festival run, and it was at the Palm Springs Film Festival, which was the first in-person film festival in California. And it was a lot of what Muhammad actually was just describing. I mean, and it was really where I realized the sort of connection between refugee homesickness and the homesickness that we were all experiencing in lockdown, because everyone had not seen each other for a year, right? At that point. And the energy in the room of being together in a theater was so electric. I mean, I was just crying the entire time. I mean, the film obviously is very emotional for me, but also just the experience of being back in community with people. Like it was very raw. And then it was really the moment where we had this I'll never forget him. We in the Q&A, there was a man named Bayo who was from Lagos, from Nigeria, who stood up, and he was just in tears, and he goes, it's been 40 years since I've been back home to Nigeria. Like my nieces and nephews have their own children now, and I don't see them. Like, thank you for telling my story. And it was like the moment, it was the moment where we really realized that like the film was going to connect differently now. Be- yeah.
And Muhammad, were you in that screening or would you attend have you attended any other ones, in person
No,
ones?
I wasn't that screening. That it just warms my heart when you see people connecting at that deep level. When somebody says, "Thank you for telling my story," he saw himself in the movie, and rightfully so. This is the United States of America. This is a nation of immigrants, built for immigrants by immigrants. Imagine how many people have come here. We're not that old of a nation. We're a couple clicks, compared to the age of Aleppo or Damascus. What is 300 years compared to the age of the Umayyad Mosque, or the archaeological sites in Damascus. So for yet to see a country that it has a very stark pushback against immigrants that is built by immigrants by its on its own history is something that always feels a bit bitter to me and sad. So when I see a creative way, the art, the video, being able to verbalize what people have been struggling with in this country, it really warms my heart up. That there are so many people that are going under very much the same hardship that I've experienced, that have struggled to tell the people how they feel. On the outside, they look very comfortable. They have good jobs, they have cars, they have beautiful house in suburbia, but on inside they are troubled. Well, why is that? It's very important to learn these stories.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just want to say one thing about that too, which is that, you know, a lot of my intention in making the film was it was all sort of rooted in what I was going through with my wife at the time, because she, like you, Wad, she was a journalist back in Pakistan, and she had seen things in Lahore and in Karachi, which, at that were shattering. Because certainly, like the West, when we sort of commission pieces, tell us the story of Pakistan, they're not interested in the architectural history of Pakistan. They're not interested in the culinary history or the music, the Sufi traditions. They want drone attacks. They want, Taliban. And she was a person who had to go out on the front lines, as I'm sure you can relate to. And so when she finally came to the United States, all of that all of that information was living in her body, and it's like, I think in the West, when we look at, she was an immigrant, but when you look at refugees specifically, you're like, okay, you're now here and you're safe. And it's like, being in a, like, what does it actually mean to be safe? Like, okay, like maybe like we are not in a place where there's active war happening, but we're in an environment that does not see us, that does not recognize our history, does not recognize our culture, and in fact thinks all of those things are almost the exact opposite of what they truly are. And so to me, like, that was the sort of humanizing intent. I actually really wanted to read something to you because it made me think about your movie. And sorry, I'm just like getting in my head a little bit right now, but there's this book, The Body Keeps the Score, which is a very excellent sort of book on post-traumatic stress. And something that happened that I read was that there were studies conducted during World War II in England showing that the children who lived in London during the Blitzkrieg and were sent away to the countryside for protection against German bombing raids fared much worse than children who remained with their parents and endured nights in bomb shelters and frightening images of destroyed buildings and dead people. And it made me think so much of your movie, and it made me think so much of Mohamad's sort of story with his mother deciding to go back. Because to be in an environment of war where you're actually in community might be in some ways less traumatic than being in a safe place that doesn't see you.
Yes, I mean, also like really the scene of you, Muhammad, with your mom and this last chat before she goes off back to Damascus. I mean, like, I swear this is might be happening in every Syrian like house, even through the phone or when they meet in one place like London or like Lebanon or Jordan or like Turkey. But this is always like the same conversation happening again and again. And you totally understand like your mom position. Like, I mean, for me, it's so like makes sense. And at the same time, I totally like in your place, when you asking her like enough, you have to get out now. So there's so many levels of like complexity, emotions and stuff where like we can't really even judge like ourselves or of what we're thinking or other people around. um and here like just brought me to one point I was thinking while I was watching the whole story, and I have seen it like more than 3 times so far. I mean, one of the things I felt kind of like a little bit missing within the narrative of the film and what Muhammad was trying to say. Like this story that does not really like it highlights so many issues and so many important issues with the Syrian situation and this human experience and human suffering. But at the same time, I felt a little bit like taking one step back when it comes to what really happened in Syria. And I have my own like analyze why this is like, is it Muhammad's decision? Is it your decision, Jamie? Is it something like you talked about between both of you? But I felt like, especially for example, for one sentence, like when Muhammad says, um, we can't identify when the war started, or like like I can't really like call the exact sentence, but I felt when I listened this was, I was like, what do you mean? I really wanted to hear from you more, Muhammad, about like what is for you. Like, I don't want to come into your political like thoughts about what happened, but as part of preserving our memories and what's happening, I just felt we are talking like a volcano like thing or earthquake, and when we keep asking and saying like like being bombed, being destroyed, being like burned. And I just felt I really want to have your opinion about like why this decision, how this decision been made, what you were thinking about while you decided to take the narrative on this level.
Yeah,
Anyone would love to? Yeah.
You can start, Jimmy, and I'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in some respects, like I see the film as like a companion or like a sort of a continuation, because there's been a body of films like yours that to me, like your film in my mind is like, I think I've even heard you say it, like it's a weapon against the regime, right? And to me, like I didn't want to fall into that tradition of that form of storytelling because I didn't think it was my place to tell that story, and I didn't think that I could add anything that you hadn't already done and filmmakers like Talal Durkee hadn't already done. And so what I was sort of like, my lens was really on the ways in which we in America, in the context in which we were operating at that time, were failing in refugee resettlement and failing in having empathy for our immigrant and refugee communities, because that was the thing that felt most charged to me in the time. But like certainly, um, you know, in my mind, I hope that this is just another thing that sort of can point to the atrocities that the regime perpetrated on its people, because it didn't just kill innumerable people, it also eviscerated a culture. And I felt that that was just a thing that never really gets talked about in the media, as we always talk about the dead bodies and we always talk about the cost. But here's a layered, you know, very long history that has also been destroyed. And I just wanted to add something about that into the conversation too, if that makes sense.
Um, Waad, we were living in times where people were not interested. In the media, they called it Syria fatigue. Um, what had happened, I had talked about it in my sculptures in itself. Anybody that studies my sculptures deeply can see what really had happened. But what I felt personally is people were not interested. People, some people will say it out loud. Why should we care? And people will not say it, but you can tell like, why should I care? We've been watching this over and over and over. Um, so to build empathy without using your typical way of showing blood and war, it was a very challenging way because you're dealing with an administration that was not only not resettling refugees, using rhetoric. This is the highest office in the nation that is using rhetoric against Muslim immigrants, against Muslims in general, travel ban based on your religion, your ethnicity. We were, to me, it boiled down to the very basic. Are you seeing me as a human? Before, see me as a human first. See, build that common denominator before I tell you what had happened. And the attention span of people is very short these days. So, in a short doc, you have a very short time to build that humanistic. And then anybody that just Googles what happens in Syria, it is crystal clear the atrocities that have been committed, the dhulm that had happened. Um, so to me, that was like Jimmy said, it's out there. Anybody that cares will find out what had happened. But my job, at least as an artist, is to make people care firsthand, to look up who are these people? Why should we care about them? And my way was if they saw me very similar to them, and my family is very similar to them, and we built that common denominator, that similar human experience, then they might go, well, I guess you weren't that terrorist I thought about to begin with, you know?
Yeah, especially with your bird, like, and
Yeah,
what people
so
will
I,
think
I
about
do
it.
tricks
Yes.
like this. Yes.
I mean, there's so many questions coming from the audience, and I really don't know how, like, I think we already like over the time, but I really want to ask this question because it's always what make me so happy when people ask that. Someone is saying, thank you so much for the Q&A. What changes are you most hoping to see happen because the film is now reaching like audiences? And then what would you like to see those of us here do?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually the singular joy of this process is to have conversations with people such as
Yeah.
yourself, also who can like speak to this as well. So I also want to ask you that question because the film should really be a vehicle for this for the Syrian people in the diaspora to be able to make a case for what they need and what they want. But I'll say certainly a lot of like my thinking is very rooted in the United States, of course, which is like the
Yeah.
ways in which we fail with refugee resettlement. And like certainly I am like very interested in making sure that we can create more empathy based programs around refugee resettlement. I want the film, well, like we're doing a talk next week with Raices, which is a large sort of organization that was famous in combating the Trump administration with the kids in cages, but they do beautiful work with artists and refugees in order to give them a pathway home. So we're very interested in setting up and working with those programs. That's a lot of what that conversation's about. And then, I mean, certainly just as the film can continue to just be in a long line of important and beautiful documentaries that have come before us, to just never forget what the regime perpetrated and to never forget what Syria had and what still has in its people, and to just allow it to continue to be a resource for Syrians in the diaspora to remember what life maybe felt like, to remember their architectural history and their cultural history. Um, that's a lot of it, but I don't know, Mohamad. Is there anything? I'm going to think of things for the next like 20 minutes. But what are you feeling, Mohamad?
You know, as a quasi newly naturalized American citizen, um, I no longer just do things driven by my Syrian story. Yes, that's part of what I'd like to do, but the outcome for me is I got stuck here 10 years before the Syrian war based on my identity post 9/11 in the Bush administration. And then
Yeah.
which had their own travel ban, as we learned from the film. They didn't call it a travel ban, but it's still it. It 23 nationalities suffered from it, and we couldn't go home. Then the war started. Then the Trump administration came, and there was a travel ban that verbatimly was called a travel ban. To me, this what comes next to me is I have quit my corporate job now, and I've focused completely on doing art with colleges and galleries to send my message to the young people that are tomorrow's future leaders. In my mind, my goal moving forward, I do not want anybody in this country with the morals that it stands for, with the Constitution that stands for freedom and equality, to ever go through what I have gone through, ever again. So my goal is to use art, to use film, to use any creative soft tool to get to those future leaders. And I've been doing quite a bit with private academies and colleges. And in my mind, if you catch them, when they're open to your message, there's a big chance nobody's going to come by and say, "Yeah, let's do a travel ban that changes the lives of people based on their ethnicity, looks, or Muslim name or religion." That's not the America I signed up for. That's not the America I struggled about 2 decades without my family, and so on. So this is my bigger message here. I'm a proud American and a proud Syrian as well. Those do not fight with each other, and I really long to seeing the United States, the country that follows its constitution and freedom and equality, and hopefully bringing back the American dream. Otherwise, if it's not possible and we get another administration like the last one, then Ardullahi wasi'a.
I mean, I hope not, and I hope really like it's a long fight and a long journey, but I hope with everyone who's listening and also like everyone who's trying to work hard toward that, this is something like I really believe people can achieve that, as similar to Syria and to what next for Syria. So yeah, we have a lot of hope. We feel like very disappointed so many times, but yeah, we have just to keep working toward that day. I mean, sadly, this is the end today, and there's so many questions I really wanted to ask more and more about the process of the film, about you personally, Muhammad. So I really hope we can continue this in another conversation. And I just want to thanks everyone who's was listening today, and it's really like my pleasure and honor to have like you all your questions, and I'm really sorry for not picking up so many questions from the audience, but hopefully in a longer conversation we can do more. So good evening everyone, or good night. I hope you really have a like all lovely weekend. Jamie and Muhammad, if anyone wants like close with a quick goodbye, please, like.
No, you said it beautifully, Waad. And again, just thank you for your thoughtfulness, and thank you for everything that you've done with your film and with your, your activism. I'm really grateful that you hosted this, and I'm really grateful for everyone who attended here today. And Mohammed, of course, I love you, man.
Love you too, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Waad. Thank you. We really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
and good luck with the rest of the journey. I mean, I believe you have like a big things coming, so I really hope like everything will work out for the film, and where you can really reach out more audience and more people to see the story. So good night, everyone, and hope to see you all in different places.
Thank you, Waad. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thank you.